last thing for those in the room is if you wish to ask a question, we'd ask that you come up this way. The microphones are in the owl. And from the back of the room, we know that the audio is not great in terms of people being able to hear. So with that, I will turn back to Audrey, who's our host for the evening.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Audrey Gillespie. I am the co-chair of Synod this year with the Reverend Michael Reid, St. John's Portsmouth here in Kingston. So again, I'd like to welcome you all, and I will start with the Bishop who will open us in prayer. Thank you.
Everyone, let us pray. The Lord be with you. Gracious and loving God, we give you praise and thanksgiving for this day, albeit this very wet day within a very wet week. We give you thanks for safe travel for those who are here. We give you thanks for those who have joined us online tonight. We pray that you will be present with us in our conversations and discussions as we prepare for our synod at the end of May. As the great themes of situation, inspiration, and celebration guide our way forward, may you be present by the power of your Spirit to carry us forward as you would have us go. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you.
Can everyone hear online okay? I just had a question in the chat. Everybody here, if you can just nod. I guess if you can't hear me, you're not going to nod your head. Thanks.
Okay, again, welcome everybody to this pre-synod meeting. We will have an agenda, hopefully not, so bring it up. And I'd like to introduce, everybody knows the Bishop, David Seltzer is here. He will be doing a presentation a little later on the agenda, and Alex will also be doing a presentation on the finances, and Wayne is also here. We will be, all of us, here for any questions that you may have throughout the evening. That's what this evening is for, to make sure that you are prepared and know everything you need to know for the synod in a few weeks. Before we begin, the Bishop will.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Audrey, and I want to make sure, just to check and make sure everyone on the bridge can hear me okay. We do know there's a resonance in this hall, and so it encourages us to speak a little more slowly so the resonance doesn't get in the way. If anybody is having trouble hearing on the bridge, please indicate and let us know. A couple of things that I want to talk to you about tonight. First of all, last night we had our first pre-synod meeting out in Roslyn, and that was a wonderful gathering of synod delegates, mostly from the west end of our diocese. After that, traveled to the Toronto airport to pick up Archbishop Francisco de Silva of our companion diocese of Southwest Brazil. And it was wonderful to get Francisco. His plane was a little late, so he landed into the airport around, I think it was 20 after 1. We got back to Kingston at 4 this morning. I got back home at 4:30. I was up at 7:30. We had the ACW annual meeting all day. And now I'm here tonight. So poor Francisco, when he got to the hotel, he was having trouble with his English. And as you can tell from my prayer, I'm having trouble with my English, and I have nothing else to go to after that. So it is great to be here with you tonight. With Francisco coming, he's now going to be in Barriefield for the next few weeks, up until the 12th of June, actually. And then he'll be coming to Kingston, and he'll be here till the end of July. He wants opportunity to travel around the diocese. He'd love to come to parishes. He'd love to come to worship. Any special sessions that you want to plan, maybe talk about the life of the church in Brazil, he's happy to do that. Some of you may remember Archbishop Francisco from our synod in 2014, where he was our keynote speaker and did a town hall on the life of the church in Brazil. So we have enjoyed immensely our connections, not only with the Southern Diocese of Brazil, but also Rio de Janeiro. And we've had a lot of connection with that country, and the Canadian church nationally has a lot of connection. So if you want to carry back to your parishes, if something you want to think about for Francisco to do, contact me. We're keeping a calendar at the office, and that calendar is beginning to fill up I've been invited week after next to be the preacher at the Synod of the Diocese of Algoma in Sault Ste. Marie. And they also have an early ministry conference that they're doing, and we're going to be speaking there. So Francisco and I are on a big 10-hour road trip to Sault Ste. Marie next week. So we're looking forward to that as well. That's just about Francisco. The other issue that I want to address is the situation that we have now in our diocese following our electoral synod on Saturday. I hope all of you have received the communication sent out. There's a variety of things that are flowing from that now, but I just wanted to speak a little bit to that. And if you had any questions this evening, there were a number of questions that we had at the gathering in Roslyn last night, good questions, and we were able to speak to that. I begin by saying that there's not a lot that I can say, because in matters like this, there's more you can't say than you can say, but I can speak to process and the way things work. An allegation, as I said in the letter, was received against our Bishop-elect, William Cliff. And so the first question around that is who has jurisdiction? And as you can imagine, there's a jurisdictional quagmire here, because you have the Diocese of Brandon, where William is the diocesan bishop. You have the ecclesiastical province of Rupert's Land, where he is present. You have the ecclesiastical province of Ontario, who was responsible for running our episcopal election. That's why I wasn't at the cathedral. That was the Archbishop's responsibility to run that election through to the end. So I came in when it was all over. And then you also have our Diocese of Ontario. So the number of jurisdictional questions here. So jurisdiction to deal with this complaint rests primarily with the provincial, with the metropolitan of our province, Dan Germont. So she's the one that takes primary responsibility, working with her chancellor. And also, as you know, Alec carries two hats here. He's our finance officer for the diocese half-time. His other half-time position is as the executive officer for the ecclesiastical province. Those are two very separate things. But he works with Archbishop Germont, advising and helping to implement what needs to happen in the ecclesiastical province as that moves forward. So they're taking the primary jurisdiction and receiving the complaint and acting upon it. That's and so Archbishop Germont had a responsibility. That's why in my letter you probably received, those of you who are synod delegates got two communications. Bishop Germont, because she wanted to communicate to the synod delegates that she had responsibility for in the electoral synod. Also, my responsibility is to communicate to the whole of the Diocese of Ontario, which includes the synod delegates. And I wanted that letter included with my communication to the whole of the diocese, and that's what went out. We put that together, spoke about it, and then moved forward with that. So that communication has gone out. The policy that will govern what happens is the same church policy of the ecclesiastical province. And that policy governs how the administration of this complaint will happen. As I indicated in my letter, the first thing that happens when a complaint is registered or an allegation is made, that the individual against whom it's made, if they're in holy orders, they are, and it's an ecclesiastical term, inhibited. And I wanted to make very clear in my communication that that does not speak to the veracity of the allegation. That's an administrative procedure where the person against whom the allegation is made now has to step back from all responsibilities. And that inhibition is placed in the province of Rupert's Land, including his own, that would include his own diocese of Brandon, but also as our bishop-elect and in the ecclesiastical province of Ontario. So as this works through, Bishop Cliff, while remaining our bishop-elect, is inhibited from functioning as a bishop until this allegation is dealt with and the resolution that is made. There is a part of the Safe Church policy. There is, and I can't remember the acronym, but there's a response team. This was created to assist all of us in our dioceses so that if an allegation, for example, came to me about something happening within the Diocese of Ontario, that I could have access to trained people from outside of the diocese who could come in to conduct an investigation and advise me. That helps to keep the whole investigation process at arm's length. So the ecclesiastical province will determine how that investigation will go. All of the communication will come into the provincial chancellor and then flow through to that investigating team. So that's left with us. Our responsibility in the Diocese of Ontario, or my responsibility as bishop, is to communicate as needed to our diocese, which I have done, and then to receive whatever information comes and then to inform you when I'm able to do that. One of the questions that came up last night, so I'll speak to it directly tonight, is because I had submitted my resignation and it's open-ended now with the bishop-elect being inhibited, what happens when we get to the 24th of June, which is the date that we've been talking about having what would have been a translation and an installation? My resignation letter, while not anticipating this kind of circumstances, was worded because I would not know who was being elected on the 29th of April and whether or not they could get turned around in their life to be here and take on the responsibility by the 24th of June. So my resignation letter stated that my resignation takes effect upon the installation of my successor. And what I'm committing to everyone in the diocese, and as I said last night, I'll say to you and then I'll say it openly tomorrow night, is that my commitment is that I will stay in office as long as it takes until I get to that day that I'm looking forward to, when the installation of my successor happens and we can move on as the Diocese of Ontario. I know there will be a lot of questions that people will, that communication that went out, and I did that very deliberately. That goes out through our email system. That goes to 1,500 people within the life of our diocese. Because the way I'm looking at this, my responsibility, and because I don't have primary jurisdiction, my responsibility is solely to the people of the Diocese of Ontario. And I want to make sure that they are communicated to as I'm able to communicate to them. So we'll carry on from this. Also to say, please hold everyone in your prayers. As I said in my communication to you, please hold Diocese of Brandon, Bishop-elect Cliff, the person who is the complainant in the matter, those who will be investigating it, Archbishop Germond, and we will carry on forward with that. So I just wanted to speak a little bit into this situation. I know we are in challenging waters with this, but I have every confidence that we'll move forward. And my theory in life is one step at a time. We'll be all right. We'll carry on, as the Archbishop said in her letter to the Synod delegates. Life in the Diocese of Ontario continues on as is, and we do our work. And you know, I was at the ACW annual this morning. We had over 100 people gathered. The clergy, some of the clergy of the diocese were there. I can see some in the room. They did the cooking and the serving, and there was a lot of laughter and a lot of joy in the room as the people came together, and that filled my heart with a lot of joy, because we'll carry forward. We can face challenging times, and this is a challenging time. We will carry forward, and it will go as it will go. But I can't speak to things that I don't know. So I'm not going to speak to hypotheticals, what if, but I'll try to answer any questions you have that will, because there was good questions last night in Roslyn. I'm sure if you have questions here, they will also be there. So with that, I'll turn it over to you for any questions you might have. Joe.
Is this strictly at the moment an internal church matter, and it has not progressed to a, I guess, a police investigation?
Yeah. One of the lines in the letter that I can speak to is that the appropriate authorities have been notified. But we are also working within the ecclesiastical setting as per the safe church policy of the province.
Bishop, Amy Kyle online has a question.
Hello, Bishop.
Hi,
I wanted to ask you about the group you spoke about. And I remember the formation of that group that comes to support people during times of crisis like this. Could you just mention the name of that group again? And I'll mention why I'm asking.
I can't remember the acronym.
So the group that comes together, and it's principally investigative, is the SCRT. And the now speaking as the provincial executive officer, the Metropolitan has called that group and under the direction of the Chancellor, Provincial Chancellor, Brian Finlay, and that group now begins its work. And obviously, because of the way this is set up, there are people from each diocese. The dioceses that are involved, those people are not part of that response. But there is a group that provincially was trained, and she has now called for that group to begin the work.
But I guess would it not be just immediately a police matter? Like, what is the process in that? Would this allegation that was made, would it not be a police matter initially? I'm really a little lost on that one.
Yeah, and I understand that, Abley, but we cannot speak to the specifics of the allegation. And that's why it's been given to, and all we can say is the appropriate authorities. And those appropriate authorities will determine, they have but we have to investigate it from within our safe church policy and the protocols that govern that. So we need to do that as well. So there'll be a parallel track with it. We'll see where that goes, but we can't speak to the specifics of it to determine whether something rises to the level of criminality.
Okay.
And I think important to note too, that as Alec pointed out, this SCRT group are primarily, they're investigative. That's why, and in our role here, engagement with this is the fact that on Saturday, Bishop Cliff was elected as our bishop-elect. That's our only involvement with it. That engages him with our diocese and our ecclesiastical province in that very specific capacity.
If I see Kathy Seymour has her hand up.
Kathy?
You're on mute, Kathy. I muted everybody, sorry. You're still on mute. Up on the top right corner.
Sorry. I'm
There you
sorry.
go.
I'm sorry, Bishop. Can you hear me now?
Hear you now.
Yes, you can hear me?
I can.
Okay. I'm just wondering, Bishop, if you are able to tell us if this allegation towards Bishop Cliff happened during the House of Bishops when they were gathering together to affirm him as our bishop-elect?
I can't speak to any of the specifics.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Tell you how the affirmation process works. That I can tell you. After somebody is elected a bishop in our ecclesiastical province, the Metropolitan sends an email to all of the bishops are told to keep a close eye on your computers. I've been part of this process a few times in our ecclesiastical province. And the Archbishop will say on the first ballot, Bishop William Cliff was elected as to be the 13th Bishop of Ontario, and I'm writing to seek the concurrence of the diocese of the bishops of the ecclesiastical province. And we all email back to the Archbishop simply saying, I concur. And then when that is completed, the Archbishop then has completed the concurrence process and then can declare the person as bishop-elect. There's a twofold process. The Synod has to elect the person and the bishops have to concur in the election. And what the Archbishop has done, as she indicated in her letter, is suspended the concurrence process. The provincial canons call for the concurrence process to be completed within 7 days. That's why she mentioned that this investigation and a determination regarding the allegation definitely will not be completed in 7 days. That's why she's very intentionally said, I've suspended the concurrence process. But that process usually happens very quickly by email, usually within an hour of the election. Once everyone is emailed back, as soon as they're all checked off, then the concurrence process is finished and the Archbishop can declare the elected candidate to be the bishop-elect. That process is suspended.
Okay, thank you,
And
Bishop.
that's what I can tell you about the process. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Sandra.
Bishop, thank you so much for clarifying where you are in this whole process. We all know that you could see the finish line, and now the finish line is no longer going to dock to you.
Yes.
You don't know where that finish line is. And it's great for us here and online to hear that. It would be really helpful, I think, if you were able to communicate that through a letter, just to ease the minds of the
Yes.
whole diocese that, you know, we're in this interim uncertain time, that we're still the shepherd of the diocese.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, Sandra, because I have heard that from others who have said, it's a question, are we going to be without a bishop? So if something happens, the life of our diocese, who looks after it? So I will send that letter out. I think that's an excellent idea.
If there is a question, I believe Jerry Moore had a question in the chat.
Hi, Jerry. Oh, okay.
When was Bishop Ann notified of the allegation?
The allegation came in as there's some public aspects of this because people noticed it. There were posts on social media that came in within a couple of hours of the election. These were very public. So there was nothing confidential about that. They were public posts on our diocesan page that were brought to my attention, and they were brought to the Archbishop's attention, I would say about 3 hours after the election. Any other questions, folks?
Last call
Yeah.
for on the online for questions.
Okay. If there's any other questions that come up, and don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk with you. As I say, there's some things, as you've heard me now tonight, some things I can say, a lot of things I can't say, but I can talk about process. And I know the people in the pews, as this goes out and they have the letters, they are kind of floating way above all this other stuff, and they will have a lot of questions. And as parish representatives, as clergy, don't hesitate to give me a call, and I'd be happy to engage in conversation with it. And again, please continue to hold everyone in your ongoing prayers. Thank you. Oh, excuse me, one last, forgot one thing. I did want to share with you a statement Bishop Cliff sent to me, and he said, if you wish to share it, you can. And I read the statement. I think it's short and to the point, but I think it's important to share that with you. And I shared it last night in Roslyn. So here's what Bishop Cliff wants us to know. As a bishop, I am responsible for administering these protocols when issues arise in my current diocese. It is only right and fair that I submit to them myself. I will cooperate fully with the investigation currently underway. That's Bishop Bill's statement to the synod.
Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you.
Alex has put the agenda up there. So we're moving on to number 3, which is finance. There have been 2 previous meetings on the financial framework, and Alex is going to finish up that process this evening.
Sorry. So I'm going to start just with a quick update on where we are as of the end of first quarter. So the way that our function works is each quarter, we go back to Synod Council with actuals. So with the operating fund results, what our parish receivables, a number of things like that. That's reported back to council each quarter. That's based upon what comes out of our management reporting. The second thing we do each quarter is that we do a forecast. So when you do a budget, you are back a ways and you line things, you break it, we do it by month, so we can work and see where we are at a given time. But as the year goes, as we sat and prepared this for April, we've had a couple of things that have gone up and down in the first 3 months, things that have happened that we didn't expect, things that we expected didn't happen, and timing's off. So a lot of these things, we then go in and adjust them. So we say, look, we expected that expense to be in March, but it's not going to be till May. Or we now know that we thought that was going to be a $25,000 thing, and it's actually going to be a $30,000. So what we do is prepare a forecast, and we update it, and we call it the April forecast. And what that is the first 3 months of the year, the actuals, with the rest of the year laid out as a forecast, the budget, and then what changes we know we have to make. So that's our best view of what the year end is going to look like. And that's what the forecast is. We do that in April with the first quarter. We do it in July with the second quarter. We do it in October with the third quarter. And then, of course, at year end, we're in a slightly different mode. So what is it telling us at this point? Well, our income is pretty much tracking at the end of the first quarter. Our expenses were down slightly. And what that does is, of course, we have a $150,000 budgeted deficit for 2023. And when you break that down, that's $12,000, $13,000 a month. When you break that down and you start adjusting things like, on an income of about $125,000 a month, you get 1% of that, the numbers start to the percentages get kind of funny. It looks funny because we're talking about our deficit is currently 86% below budget for the first quarter. But because of the numbers and the way they are, the scale of that sounds impressive, but it's not that large. And we'll talk to the actual number in a minute. So basically, at the end of that, we're tracking, right? Like 2% on $1.6 million budget. You're pretty darn close. For the year, we're looking at income being down slightly. That is, as we continue to adjust in with CMM and as investment income, fees, etc. Our expenses right now are looking slightly down 1%, which again is a good sign. And then finally, the deficit at the moment is tracking about 11% lower because of the effect of the income and the expenses. So basically, we're in a positive space. We take and while we have the detail level, this is the level that we project at as we look at the major categories within our budget and our reporting. So you can see Bishop's office, business finance, admin, communications, etc. So what you can see in the first column is that $151,000 budgeted deficit. The current view for the April our view is $135,000. So that's a $16,000 better than, right? And so when I speak to the numbers in that last column, you're always looking at better or worse. Numbers in brackets are worse because you always got to compare higher numbers for income is better, lower numbers higher numbers for expenses is worse. So what you'll find is we just call it better or worse. 16K to the better, and you can see the ups and downs of that. So for the most part, and this again reflects what we know. There's all kinds of things that happen over the next 9 months. We have legal actions, things that come, whether that's something at the diocesan level or whether we're supporting parishes. At any given time, we've got a number of legal actions underway. We don't know how that affects us. We know that with an Episcopal change, all of the other things that the bishop has just spoken to, we know that there'll be additional costs there. We will have moving expenses. We will have, the adjustments in stipend or housing, etc. So there's things that will change there. There's things we know as that we may adjust as a new bishop sets priorities later in the year. So That's our best view at the moment, and there are things that can move with that. So that's what we report back to Synod Council each quarter, and we work our way through what the quarter looks like, what the year to date looks like, and what the rest of the year is. The questions often get asked, how do we fund the debt when you approve a deficit budget? You have to know where the, so 1 second. I'm gonna give everybody again. And 1 second. Apologies, but it takes a second to this. Having only one screen makes it difficult. So when we went with the budget last year to council, and basically we had $90,000 left in our pandemic funding. That's basically the money that the federal government paid the diocese for our own staff. And that's not the parish money, it was Sue's money. It was in the diocesan staff side. Second, is we still have $90,000 of that. We did that. We did grants. We did grants like the tech grants out of that money. We did things like the air purification, and of course the PFRT, the Pandemic Financial Response Team. There were, I think it was 13 or 14 parishes that received grants through that. And that all came out of that fund. But there's still $90,000 remaining. That covers one piece of it. And then the second thing is the income that comes from the ministry allocation fund, which is where as churches are closed, the property and assets go into that ministry allocation fund. The income from that is available to council. That's where we fund, by the way, the reach and stretch grants from. We had a number of those that have come out. There's another $50,000 there. That covers 140 of the 150. And then of course we carry in the corporate, in a business world, it's called retained earnings. In our case, it's called the surplus, the accumulated surplus or deficit. It goes to that. We know where the cash comes from. That funds the bulk of it from those two sources. So that's where that has been and comes from. So that takes us to the end of March and a view to the end of the year. Remember, this is a journey. Right? We've been on, well, this diocese has been on a journey for over 160 years. We'll celebrate that later this year. But the path that we've been on has seen us make a number of changes and adjustments. Since Bishop Michael episcopacy began, was that 3 weeks ago? 4 weeks ago? A month ago, 12 years ago, we've been down a path, and it's important to remember the path we've been through, and also that we're on a path that continues. Sometimes we get so focused on the things going on, we lose track of the fact that there is a future, and it will be different, but the future, there is a future, and we continue to journey towards it. We've done some things over the last number of years. You know, if one thinks about the last 10 years, there's been some major structural changes. And I'm now speaking not only from a ministry and program and structure, but also from a focus primarily on finance. So we've done things like, you know, Camp Hyanto, the closure of Camp Hyanto was a difficult decision. And it was one, though, that was driven at the end of the day by really a number of factors. It decreased the amount of kids that were participating, right, at a fairly low level. The financial challenges. Last year, we had $150,000 deficit. The difference between what the camp brought in and what was spent. So that was $150K. That was a significant on top of the other pieces. And then finally, it was just a matter of having enough people to be engaged to help run. Some of our churches struggle with having people engaged. Camping is a very challenging environment. So Hyantal was closed. It's now been sold, and along with actually St. Luke's Lyndhurst was packaged with it. And so that was all closed. That was one big piece. Second big piece was the church book room. And that was, again, it was a number of things, as everything with the diocese is. It's never as simple as one thing. It was a business. It was a retail business. It was also a ministry. And finally, it supported churches by, providing everything from palms to books to all the other, bits that they sourced for you. But we again hit a point where things have changed. And, the book room once upon a time was making a good profit. In fact, back in the 80s, the edition that was put on the Diocesan Center, a chunk of that was paid for by accumulated profits in the book room. We got to a space where the book room was losing $150,000 a year. And we were in a space where we had a lot of money tied up in the inventory, and it just didn't make sense anymore for us to sustain that. So again, in 2019, we closed the book room. We've done things like the Diocesan Center, 90 Johnson Street, previously a bishop's residence, back in Bishop Evans's day, became the diocesan office. And we hit a point where, number one, we were looking at some capital investments. Right? We were looking at significant things in the HVAC system, in the inside of the building, which hadn't really had much done with it in a couple of decades. We were looking at windows in a historic building. We were looking at pointing, roof. Those that have historic buildings know how all that goes. We were looking at, pushing upwards to $1 million of capital investment. We didn't feel we had that. Or that was the right place to put it. So and then what happened is we sold the building, and the net proceed of that now sits in our diocesan funds and generates about $50K a year of income. And our costs where we are now are certain because we're in an all-in lease and we don't have capital to invest. So we've done structuring that has done those things over the last number of years. We continue to flex as we have gone forward, right? The archives have undergone a major change. So there's all kinds of areas where we've been through the road, we've reinvented some things, we've shifted things, and the journey continues. So part of that journey is you start looking forward more. And coming out of the pandemic, that creates certain challenges. Anybody remember the pandemic? That's a thank you. There's a sanitizer right over there. But as we come out of the world is different. Our churches are different. They're, and across the national church, we are looking at, churches have come back about 60 to 70% of what they were. Is a general, and there's lots of exceptions and lots of specifics, but in a lot of cases, Sunday attendance, financial challenges. So you can sort of put your head down and go, I'm just going to ignore that and hope that it gets better. And we do have faith, but faith and planning and stewardship are different things. We are stewards. So we started to talk about how do you look at a 3-year structure? How do you look at something that now starts to move in bigger pieces? We'll talk about that for just a moment. The concept we've worked through is that we've put together a 3-year, and in the corporate world, I know that's the world I come from, but you would do a strategic plan, and that would be a 10-year document. It would be a 10-year process you went through to plan for 10 years. it was pretty fuzzy once you got past the first number of years, and it got fuzzier when you got out to 10. But what it did was then that drove what we called the operating plan, and that was a 3, sometimes 4 or 5 year plan that put things in a little more focus as you can adjust things that require more than just a year of a budget. Then you actually have a budget, which is actually a tactical document because budgets cover by definition 1 year. So the concept was to put that framework together through a consultation project, set goals and objectives that then you drive the dollars through. Again, in most cases, you sit and you say, what do we want to achieve? And then what's it going to cost to get there? And so that's setting the goals and the objectives, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. And then working through that, looking at the context of what it is, and then Synod meets every 2 years, and Synod would look at the structure, look at that 3-year plan, and by definition, that would be a 2-year plan with Synod before the next Synod, and then 1 year always that you just keep rolling off. So that was the concept. And then within each year, Synod Council, that's actually consistent with the canons, would approve the budget for the following year within the framework that had been approved by Synod. Mentioned about planning and how you build some of that out. You start setting goals and objectives. And then you work your way into what that is going to look like financially. And then you continue through and you monitor how you're performing financially. And then you look at how you're performing against your goals and objectives. And that's a continual loop. You would do that on a fairly consistent basis. You say, where are we? Where do we want to be? What do we need to adjust? What's that going to take? Why longer term planning is important? There's a lot of things changing. And of course, the church moves and changes very quickly, isn't it? I mean, in the snap of how many years did we have between prayer books? Between the BCP and the BAS, how many? I think there was a few weeks in there. Hymn books, just change in general takes. So we're seeing things that are changing at a pace that is very different now. And things are happening faster and happening more dramatically. You've got to be able to manage change. And that's something that looking at planning helps you do that. We also look at the fact that with the timing of things, Audrey will speak more about this Synod, but the decision was made to move Synod from the fall, when it's always been the end of October-ish, early November, to the spring. And there was a number of reasons for that, but as the financial guy, the biggest reason is that, having a Synod in a hotel is expensive. You pay, not only for the facilities, but the catering is more expensive, and every time you turn around, there's another bill. So by having the Synod in the spring, we were able to get into Queen's University. Audrey will speak about the specifics of that. But what it did was, apart from all the other things that will allow for, it'll cut the cost over half from what it was when we had it at the 4-point share. So that by itself is a big piece. And then these other factors, like you hear feedback, like, the time of year and where churches are, where the weather is. Some people don't like driving at night in the late October, early November. It gets dark earlier. So there's a bunch of reasons why when you package it up. But by moving Synod back to May, that makes planning the next year with a budget that's credible pretty tough. Because there's a number of things. Part of it is, of course, can anybody tell me what inflation is going to look like next year? Right now, the end of the year, I can base it on and I work from those factors. Most of our groups have started their work just now really into their work for 2023. Without asking them, what would you want to do in 2024? And how we budget that. So there's a number of reasons that make that difficult, and run rates as things change. So that again says you've got to have a process that allows Synod to act as governance, because that's the role of Synod. There's new needs emerging, old needs that continue to have to be served, and there's an urgency. So if you don't get focused on it, and part of the reason that a good long-term planning process works is because you get into conversation. It's not saying, what am I doing next week? It's talking about, where do we want to be in 2 years' time? Where do we want to be in 3 years' time? Having that conversation is useful. Apart from saying we're going to need to spend $1.98, it's useful to talk about it. It's useful to get different perspectives, to hear and to adjust. And that's part of what good governance is. Right? Governance and Synod at the end of the day is governance. It is whether you look at it from a legal perspective, from a canonic perspective, we are, as the bishop always says, we are episcopally led and synodical government. That's governance. And then finally, we just resourcing. Getting the resources we need and getting them aligned. Money's a big one, but also, most of our churches now, the struggle is, money has always been a struggle, always will be. But the issue is more about human resources. And I can say that the churches that have closed in my, I guess, 8 years in the office, we had one that was financially driven. But all the others have been basically where they've looked at it and said, we can't go on. We don't have bishop, the quote that I heard was, Bishop, we're tired.
Well,
There's no longer anybody to.
Coffee because I had to pick up my granddaughter, and so I just grabbed a quick.
Greg, can you go on mute?
I was kind of leaving. I had to pick up the way I went. Marty's looking a little peaked, I guess. Is the way.
Well, I could, but I won't.
He says he's having some issues, Randy. Yeah.
Well, and of course, the other thing is, apart from everything else, he's core to the diocesan office operations, so. But human capital, people to read lessons, to keep the books, to do bulletins, to shovel the snow, to turn the heat up on Sunday morning, all those things that you know so well. Some of the churches are simply running out of. How do you plan in that space? How do you put the attention on it? And how do you ensure you have the right investments? Because investing is not just the operating money that comes out of CMM and such. It's also the diocesan assets we have. Anybody know how much we have in our central investment fund? Bill.
17,050,000. We just dropped off a check the other day.
So Bill's right on part of it. We actually have $22 million in our diocesan central fund. Of that, over 17 million of it belongs to parishes. Right? That money is parish money that instead of investing it in the bank or investing it or Jack and the Beanstalk or burying it in the backyard, that money's in the central investment fund. And so that money sits. And that money is, there's about 5 million of diocesan money, but there's a chunk of that that's restricted. Nothing is ever easy. But how do you decide where to put your investments? Where do you decide how to invest in us? And those are the questions that need to start to come through as we work our way through the longer term. So, that little. So, a budget is a tactical document, important piece. but it's got a year focus, it's objective focus. I separate objectives and goals. Right? The goals, the way I put it this way is, my goal is to be healthier. Have a healthier lifestyle but my objective is lose weight, drop my blood pressure, drink less, whatever. Right? Those are objectives. So budgets are focused around objectives. We also want to make sure we're looking at the goals and the alignment between goals and the bigger objectives. As you move into a planning process, it becomes more strategic and you build the bridge between your objectives and your goals. You focus on governance and leadership. One of the things we did, and some of you have been in the consultation sessions have seen this, and I'll try and kick through it fairly quickly. We did run the consultation. Audrey mentioned earlier, we run 2 sessions of that. And the first one we actually ran from St. Mary Magdalene Napanee and online. And we had 7 people that were in the room submit paper forms. We had another 31 people online during the meeting submit responses. And then we had, following that, you could go on the, we had a link to an online form and you could do that. So we had in total 50 individuals. So it's a material size group. I'm not walk through these in detail, but we asked, what do you think the economic factors are that's going to affect the financial life of our church? Number one, clearly with demographics, right? That we're looking at where the aging in particular is in our churches. That's a big economic factor. Behind that, ranked in was community needs and economic factors, inflation, stock markets, those kinds of things. And then the other ones you can see behind that, world events, government regulatory. We asked at the individual church level, what do you think the priorities are? Number 1 and number 2 were actually quite close. Number 1 was programs, community service, and new ministry. That was listed as number 1. Right behind it, right alongside it, was finance and administration. Then farther down came ministry, liturgy, and pastoral care. These are again from a financial perspective. Communications and networking. One of the interesting things there was that the pieces that come out of that was around what communications is. Natural default is, well, of course we want the diocese sending us stuff. We want you to talk to us. We want 2 things. One is you got to listen. And the second is there was a lot of commentary about communication within churches, which is an interesting reflection too. Because in some churches, people are going, we don't know what goes on. If you're not on parish council or advisory council, you don't know what's going on. And, we don't know. One individual said, well, we didn't know till the annual meeting. We lost money. We ran a deficit. Nobody told us. So there's a how do we work at communications within the church, and then programs and 8 o'clock crowds versus 10:30 crowds. Anybody ever seen that movie? There are 2 entirely different groups in a lot of churches. And how do people come together? So those are the pieces there. Number 5, facilities and property. Surprisingly, thought it would have, might have thought it would have been higher. We do have more churches getting a space where capital is required. Here it is. If you look over at the front of beautiful St. Mark's here, you'll see scaffolding. Get the point again, despite previous investments, well, there's a major capital investment required for the tower. We've got several other churches that are into multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars in program. And then we've also got churches that want to respond to green, and that takes investment in the buildings. And then finally, HR and legal support, which is one of those things that becomes important when you need it. Right? When you have a situation where you're have an employee situation with a organists are never problematic, but you know, in a situation where you know, parish the custodian, the admin support, whatever, or there's a boundary. We are currently working for one church to fight a boundary dispute on a property matter. So there's a lot of things that take that kind of stuff. We have a human rights tribunal issue we're working on behalf of one. So there's a range of things that go into that, but I would argue that's one of those things you don't need it until you need it. On our shared diocesan ministry, so this now is looking beyond the church to the rest of the diocese. Number one there, I think this speaks loudly to where our bishop has focus has been since his consecration, that's reconciliation. But where people come back to is that reconciliation is clearly clear number one. Number two and number three, green creation care, the greening of our buildings and support for God's creation and refugee support. Those two came in.
They can hear.
Number two, number three, but close. Number four, justice and peace, and number five, the ministry.
I think so.
And then finally, we asked questions around beyond the borders, beyond the diocese. There was three there. The Indigenous ministries, our national Indigenous ministries, which came out far and far ahead of everything. The heaviest support was right there. The second was around provincial, which tends to be more practical things. We just talked about Safe Church, but the response to Walkerton and what they were going to put rules in place that would have shut a lot of our rural churches down from having any water. And that makes it difficult to have the parish life. So that was a response. We have worked through things like the Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. There's a lot of things where we play practically at the provincial level. And then at the national level, supporting General Assembly. That came in as third. Comments are always what brings color. Comments bring better understanding and occasionally a chuckle. So there was a, you know, always, as always, expression of gratitude for the opportunity to speak. But areas like outreach and mission.
Yeah. She sent me that too.
Greg, can you go on mute? You're kind of, thank you. The continued shift in support. It was interesting, some of the comments around how we work together, how we're collaborative and cooperate with each other. We know that, you know, we have more and more shared ministries. Sometimes that's a response as churches, you know, that now as the cost of clergy continues to rise, we have a lot of very good but senior clergy. Most of you know what that looks like. There's chat, so that starts to get into sharing ministries, but how do you also share ministry that goes on in the churches? Not just dinners important, but how do you get into shared programs across multiple churches? The resources may not sit in one place. How do we work together? So there's sharing, collaboration, creativity, imagination, all things. And a lot of comments around, we got to figure out not only what we want to do, but how and when we're going to do it. Again, that's change management. Once you decide something, how do you decide I actually have to do something? Second group of these, and always a reminder to be thankful for what we have. Always look at the glass half full. It's important. So that's there, the urgency again, but concerns on retiring clergy. We have all dioceses, a lot on climate change and the need for support at the church level. And then things you would see, the last one I thought was interesting and I tagged it on there. And it's a potential strategy you could follow. Just focus on the people we have, tend to be older, and just, everybody will be happy until we're gone. Not here for a long time, we're here for a good time. And that was presented a couple of times as a path you could go. I'm not saying we want to go that. So that's what we heard. So we decided when we listened and worked through all the pieces, and there was concerns expressed that we're going to be moving forward without the new bishop seat. And the new bishop could will undoubtedly have another perspective. There was that concern. There was questions about how we move this quickly. We don't, as I said, we have to work our way through change. And this takes time for people to understand and for us to kind of process how it's going to go. So that challenge. And so basically decided, let's hold tight on the 3-year thing and bring that back as we come to the next synod in 2025. And then, but what for the 2024 budget, the synod will basically approve a set of guidance. It's going to go into the budget, which will then, and I'll talk to the detail of that, but then come back to council for approval at the end of the year. And that's we've seen this chart before. I think I've used this chart for every year I've been around on the finance committee. But you see up here, we've started with guidance from synod, then carried through the forecast that goes into that, the requests that come into diocese from diocesan groups, priorities and consultation sessions, stuff that we put in the system mechanically, and that then goes to council. The council works it through and sends it. Then we take it out for consultation session. Which is usually in September. And then it would then come back finally, and we shoot for October because November is usually the last council meeting of the year. Council doesn't normally meet in December. And other than an emergency like not having the budget approved, we wouldn't do that. So there's an incentive to try and get it done in November. That would be the time frame that will come in. And of course, that document that we've always worked to, I showed you the executive summary of that earlier at the section level, but that document produced was on the website, comes out of the consultation. Once it's approved, that's fixed. And then we report against that. And quarterly, we put the quarterly reports up. People can access those along with the forecast. So the plan at synod this year is to present bigger financial picture. So part of that will be working through what the 5-year trend looks like. So 2018 takes you back pre-COVID. And that's a reasonable starting point. By the way, one of the things that through the grace of the federal government, we didn't get all the student grants we applied for, but they did approve our financial analyst assistant. And so we had last year, we had a very sharp a young lady that's a commerce student from Queens and Smith School, I have to call it now, but did some amazing work for us. This year, what I want to do is have the student work through each church and the financial data and trending, hopefully for the last 10 years. So all that data comes in every year from green sheets. So we'll be able to map through, where does each church, what's their income? How does it look? Where does it change? What's being spent? Where does it go? There's a lot of that trending, and that works timely because as we begin this longer planning process, and as we have a new bishop on board, that's all pieces that's going to help with another understanding of where our churches are. That we'll do it first. I'll do some just high level pieces because we won't have the student yet, but I've got lots of data to work with. We'll be working again, just covering what we covered earlier on 23, talk about the investment fund and present again some of the high-level pieces of that. Parish receivables. So at any given time, churches have receivables to the diocese. It runs anywhere from just under 400K to 700,000 or 800,000, depending upon where we're at. And when we issue those insurance bills, we're going to go up by about $500,000. And then churches will pay that down and we'll work our way through. But we track where that sits. We look at churches that are falling behind and that takes certain actions. So all of that is an important piece. And out of that is our viability updates. We've had a policy where we work with churches that have fallen behind, put together a financial viability. That's another piece that reporting back. Just a summary of the input and the timing as we talk to. And then there'll be a motion on the governance. And what does that governance look like? Looks like that. So the first thing it says is Synod directs that we should increase CMN to 45%. So the first, by the way, for those that can't see from the back of the room, but Archdeacon Clark just hung himself. No, so the first piece of guidance is that CMM remains unchanged at 20%. Right, that sets that for 2024, confirms and sets that. And secondly, is we got to look at how we continue to look for incremental income sources, and how we divide some of that up. That I love the phrase, we restrain expenses to the same level as income. I love that. I think a nice way. What that says is it's a balanced budget. It says that your income and your expenses need to be the same. So it says during COVID, we've run 2 years of deficit budgets. We did that knowing that we couldn't do that for perpetuity, but during COVID, the amount of support required, the amount of things that we had to do to manage things, the amount of pieces that did not make sense to do things with, and certain events that happened to us drove the deficits. For 2024, what we're looking for Synod to confirm is, yep, we want a balanced budget. And then the next little piece of it just reflects what we talked through in those consultation sessions. The allocation of funding should reflect the priority on reconciliation, national Indigenous ministries, new ministries, church admin, finance and admin support, and creation care. And then finally, we start looking at, again, as I talked earlier, using diocesan funds in different ways. And do we, for example, take some of that money in the investment fund and actually loan it out to churches? That's on some things like, for example, green projects. Are there ways that we can actually fund ourselves? And that's not giving it away, it's lending it, but it would then drive a return that works all the way around but provides capital. Just as an example, we have a lot of restricted funds and we need to work our way through how do we deal with those. And then finally, we loudly heard in the process was a number of churches simply don't have anybody left to do the books. That there's a greater, between the increased needs of the CRA with things like T3010s. You know what happens if you don't file a T3010? You lose your tax receipt number. You can't do income tax receipts anymore. Do you think that would be good or bad for your church's income? The T3010 every year gets a little more complex. The bereavement authority and cemeteries. There's a host of things, as well as just plain old bookkeeping. Fred or Gladys used to do the books. Can't anymore. So, and we got a couple of churches paying $500-600 a month for bookkeeping. So again, how do we built our systems towards being able to provide that. So that's what the finance side, and what you'll see at Synod is a motion around that. I was asked last night about the charts, and yep, will be available on the website. The package will include, I just got the word today, I can go and pick up our audited statements. Right, you go through the audit committee, Senate Council approved them, you then have to wait for the auditor to finish their work and then actually give you a version that doesn't say draft. So I can now go pick up the copy that doesn't say draft. But the audited financial statements, consolidated statements, all those things will be part of the package material for Senate. Any questions?
I just have a slightly related, unrelated question. Just in the news today with regards to CRA, and people who received benefits through the pandemic.
Right. Holding back tax.
And they're holding back.
incomes.
Is there any, premise or any place in the church right now that is being audited from a CRA perspective because of the way funds were spent? Through that pandemic period or anything like that? Is that ever a concern at all?
So there are places, and again, because of our structure where we have our central payroll, Revenue Canada sees us as one, from a payroll perspective, sees us as one entity. So that's why we had to do the wage subsidy the way we did, which is you've got to send your income changes in, and then we apply for the payroll. We are extremely confident and that we have no issues there.
No, and I just didn't know if that was something if you had any idea that was happening in the wider church at all. Or...
It has happened in some places.
Okay.
It has not typically happened at a diocesan. Because again, when we apply and structured it, we used our auditor as a financial advisor. So they gave us advice that said, if you do this, don't do that, do this. We also used legal advice, and I met with one of the things we do have across the national church, all the finance officers, we have a work group, and we take things, so that all of those things leads us very comfortable that we're all right. Where people are in trouble is at the individual level, more so than at the organizational. Can't see online if anybody's got their hand up, I need to step back, but okay. Anybody online? I'm just gonna drop the charts for a moment, folks, to I know it's hard to use the light. Anybody on out? See any hands up online? So I think, Roger, we can move on to
Senate agenda.
Senate agenda.
You get a low battery warning there, so I'll just want to check the batteries.
Huh? Okay. Oh, you're right, it's showing a little bit. I'm done, I mean, look into that. Go ahead, Audrey.
Can you put the first one up? That's enough, we had. So I'm going to just walk us through the agenda for Synod. It's all day Friday and Saturday, as you know, at Queen's in the Biosciences building, which is right behind St. James Church between Arch Street and Barriefield. We all convene on Friday morning at registration is between 8 and 9. Please bring some ID, the same as you did for, thank you, for the election last week. That is one of the new things in our constitution that you need to show some kind of ID. So please bring that. You will get a name tag when you come in with your package, and on that name tag will be a number. And that number is gonna correspond to the table where you sit. In the Vice Sciences building, there's a lovely big room. It's called an atrium, and it really is. It's got trees in it, and it's beautiful and light, very high. It's a lovely space. There will be tables in that room that will have numbers on, and you will sit at that table. You will be with your couch. You will be with your other lay delegates. We're not splitting you all up this year, like the last few synods back. So you will be able to sit together. Obviously, at tables there will be maybe 2 or even 3 different groups, but we will be together. We will begin with prayer with the bishop, obviously, and the bishop's charge. And the first thing you will do after that is make a response to that. And we will ask for somebody at each table to make notes. And then we have some volunteers that will collate all that material, because I'm sure there will be a lot of the same responses, the same questions. So some volunteers will put that together, and we will get the response to that charge later in the day. You will get a coffee break in the morning and the afternoon. You will get lunch. The ballot boxes will open at 10:30 and close at just before 2. And the ballots will be for Synod Council and for Provincial Synod. And David will speak to those nominations in just a minute. There will be, the first thing in the afternoon, there'll be a presentation from Carrie Hill on the Mohawk language. It's something that she was very keen to do, and we felt it was something we would like to include. So that will happen. Along with the atrium, we have a lecture hall, and that's where that will take place. It's very close to the atrium. There's no stairs or anything. You just have to walk through the way. It'll be there. Putting all this fun stuff with coffee and lunch, of course, we're going to have to do some more financial stuff, business. In the afternoon, again, we will have motions there, and again, David will speak to that in a minute. There will be some motions. There are some resolutions that are coming ready. We will then have the response to the bishop's charge. There will be some worship at the end of the day with the installation of Synod Council members, and reflections by Bishop Bell. And Bishop Bell will be doing that leading into the following day, which is when she will be leading the following day. There are booths as well. Various groups will be setting up booths. I think there's close to a dozen, so there'll be lots of different things for you to check out and ask questions about. So if we could go to Saturday, please, thank you. So Saturday is Ministry of Mission, and Bishop Bell will be leading us in that. And as you can see, there is 1 session and table discussion, and 2 sessions and table discussion, 3, and then she will end up with 4. And that is how the day will break up. So again, we will be in the atrium, you'll be in your groups. She will make her presentation, and she will want some response. We're going to have time to discuss what she said and come up with some ideas, questions, responses, whatever you feel. Again, there'll be two coffee breaks and lunch. And we will end with closing reflections from Archbishop Dumont, who will be then transitioning us into the following day when we have service up for the. Any questions on any of that?
Question.
Oh, parking. Okay, that was going to come up in my resources, but I will address parking. There is on-street parking, there's parking in the underground parking lot, there's a parking lot behind the courthouse, the other side of Barry Street where you can park. There is a bus that goes from Montreal Street and the 401. You can park there. There's a big lot if you're coming from out of town. You can park there and get the express bus, which will stop right outside KGH. It'll cost $3.25 each way. And all you've got to do is walk from KGH 5 minutes across to Arch Street and right in here. Does that answer the question? I hope. Any other questions on the agenda? It's only taken us a year to come up with this 11th copy of the agenda. So it's pleasing to everybody. Okay, we'll move on to the next two items, which are nominations for Synod Council and Provincial Synod and resolutions, and I pass that over to David. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. So the first item is Synod Council, which each of the four deaneries of our diocese, Leeds, Grenville, Frontenac, Quinte, and Hastings, have one cleric, one layperson, and the third is either clergy or lay. So you can have the possibility of two clergy and one lay, or two lay and one clergy. So that's a total of 12. And then out of Synod Council, the bishop appoints 6 additional individuals to do a balance and perspective around Synod Council. People have done their homework, which is wonderful, and we have actually a full ballot for each of those 4 deaneries. And in one deanery, this one, there are 4 people, and there's a choice between 2 lay people, and I'll explain that when we get to it. Leeds Grenville, Reverend Robert Porter is already on Synod Council. You have a 2-year term. This will be his 2nd-year term. And the 2 nominees are Mary Hay and Angela Kelman. From Frontenac, this deanery is Reverend Sandra Hansel Drover, clergy, Averly Kyle, lay, and the 2 lay nominees are Anthony Ashworth and Susan Orgel. So that's just and we will have that resolved with either one of them being a bishop's appointment or the other one elected. But by the time we get to Synod, that will be resolved. So we will have a full ballot for that. Third deanery is Quinte, and the 2 clergy who are incumbents currently and have the 2nd year to go is Noel Henry and Richard Hetke. And then the lay nominee is Kathy Seymour. And then finally, in the Hastings deanery, we have 3 nominees, all 3 new. One is Reverend Jeff O'Hare, who is currently a bishop's appointee. He will become the elected clergy delegate for 2 years. And then the second is an individual, Ann Stryker, who will be the lay person for 2 years. And then the third is another clergy, again, choice of clergy or lay, and that's the Reverend Brad Beal. So what it looks like when we get to Synod for elections, it will be a complete ballot to do that, because normally we would vote by deaneries and so forth, and those at this point through the nominating committees are full. Questions on that? Good, thank you. I will say we have a nominating committee that is multi-functioning. And prior to the 6th of January, the nominating committee was focused solely on the May Synod, the one this month. But then when Bishop Olton decided to resign, I put in parentheses, it also became the nominating committee for the election. So most of the work of the nominating committee up until very recently, we did send out the nominations form, was on the Episcopal election, which was strictly according to the constitution of this diocese. So, and my sense is with 2 very good candidates for the election on Saturday, I think the nominating committee of 1 member who's here, our infamous moderator for the forum, town hall, William Clark, and did an excellent job in terms of working together. So thank you, Bill, for your work. I appreciate it. The second is Provincial Synod. Provincial Synod does not happen until 2024, but because we do not have a diocesan synod prior to that provincial synod meeting, we will elect the representatives for provincial synod at this May synod. So provincial synod is the week of the 25th of September, 2024. The location, the sponsoring diocese is the Diocese of Algoma. We do know that it will be located in Sault Ste. Marie. That's the extent of our knowledge, although Alec can probably give you more details as it evolves. I mean, again, this is, we're now probably almost 16 months out. And currently, we are, as the Diocese of Ontario, allowed 4 clergy delegates, 4 clergy alternates, 4 lay delegates, 4 lay alternates, and 1 youth delegate. So that's a larger contingent than we would have a general synod of the Anglican Church of Canada. But they're operating in a very different system. So we have actually 4 clergy, 4 lay, plus a youth delegate, 9, plus some of the other officers of each diocese. So it's a relatively larger representative body than the national church with that. And trying to get from here to Algoma will be the interesting challenge. As Bishop Michael indicated, it's a 10-hour drive, and there are no flights. You know, so you either learn to work with the people that you get along for a long period of time, and it's almost impossible to get a train ride there. You can get to Toronto, but from Toronto to Sault Ste. Marie is a very difficult issue altogether. So we'll figure that out. At one point, it was in northern Algoma Diocese, and we took a plane. We chartered planes from Kingston to where was that? Timmins. So we'll figure that out with that. We currently have 5 nominees for clergy. That's Reverend Canon Nancy Beale, the Venerable William Clark, the Very Reverend Doug Michael, the Reverend Lynn Mitchell, and the Reverend Jeff O'Hare. So those 5 will be voted on, and if those are the 5, then we'll have 4 delegates, and then the 5th person will become the alternate for them. We are in need of lay nominees for provincial synod. As the bishop explained at the beginning of this meeting, provincial synod is one of those bodies that does its own court system and its own jurisdictional system. It also sponsors the Ontario Provincial Commission Council, Theological Education, which is about the process of ordination and so forth, and several other important bodies. As a national church, we are more governed by our province or ecclesiastical province than we are by the national church. And the province of Ontario, all 7 dioceses have their bodies in the province of Ontario. It's the only one of its kind in the national church. And the province of Ontario constitutes about 60% of the Anglican Church. So that's a pretty hefty number of Anglicans around them. And people seem to know each other very well, and they get along together very well. But it's a good experience, and it would be well worth, if you have any interest in going to provincial synod, in putting your name forward for nomination. So that's it for nominations.
Oh, questions? Yes. Yeah. You do have a nomination for the provincial synod.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry, Phyllis Marie and Jane Kirkpatrick. Yeah, we do have 2. We have 2 already. We're looking for 2 more, or actually 3 more, so we can have an alternate. Thank you, Jane. Huh?
I want to show you.
No, thank you. Good. Yeah. Phyllis Marie, who is from Cardinal, and Jane, who is from St. George's Cathedral.
The other person?
Philip Burry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. That was, good encouragement. So if you want to join Jane and Sault Ste. Marie, talk to them, and then talk to me and Victor and Ethan for nomination. Good, thank you.
Any other questions on that, anybody? Nothing online, no?
Oh, well, okay, good. So,
Resolutions?
Resolutions Committee. My error is that we ended up as Synod Council with two resolutions that came forward. And then I looked in a different email source and found two more that were clearly prior to the deadline for that. So we have a total of four, and the executive committee of Synod will incorporate the other two. So right now we have four resolutions, and according to our canons, any resolutions beyond these four have to have a 60% affirmative vote of Synod in order to be considered. So if you wake up in the middle of the night and say, we've got to pass this resolution, see if you can find 59% more people to support it so it can end up in the ballot. First one, which is a Synod Council resolution, we had our former primate, Archbishop Fred Piltz, speak to us virtually about the Sisters of St. John the Divine, and they are doing a fundraising for their guest house. The sisters are a 138-year-old Anglican order of women. We've had in our history both women and men Anglican orders. This is the sole surviving one. The Sisters of St. John the Divine. It has a house in Toronto. They had a wonderful guest house, but as long as most other structures, guest houses outlive their usefulness. So the idea that people have a washroom down the hall and so forth and so on for your own private retreat, it's like, I don't necessarily want to bathe with everybody else, so let's do something. So they are refurbishing, they're making larger spaces and rooms with that. And the goal for their fundraising campaign originally was $4 million. They have almost $2 million in hand for that. And they're looking for another $1.7 million. And the Diocese of the Province of Ontario, the 7 dioceses, have been asked to help contribute with that. So in this diocese, we are looking both at a contribution by pledge from individuals, plus we have a number of associates of the Sisters of St. John the Divine who are in this province who are being solicited. And then we have talked about matching that with a $30,000 contribution from the diocese. So we had in Synod Council a very long conversation ranging from how much longer are these elderly nuns going to live to what's it going to cost and what, I mean, you name it and we talked about it. I don't think we got into when are they all expected to die. We didn't quite go that far. But anyway, it's an incredibly good place for people to go individually and for small groups for retreats for that. And the sisters are wonderful. Sister Constance, who is the head sister for the Sisters of St. John the Divine, will be the chaplain for our synod at the end of May, and she will be here with a lot more information about the Sisters of St. John the Divine. A lot of Anglicans have no idea that we have nuns. You know, it's like, you're what? And I had a good friend who worked in the newborn unit in a hospital on the East Coast. She's Order of St. Helena, and she said, hi, I'm Sister Rosie, and I'm here to congratulate you on your new baby, and I want to be sure that you don't have another one until it's time. And they're like, you're what, from whom and where, and what are you talking about? And she said, yes, and let's talk. So that's, modern nuns. That's the first resolution. Synod Council approved it after this long conversation, and it will go to Synod. The second one comes from St. Paul Cardinal and two individuals there. And there's a resolution for greenhouse gas reduction, which is part of the kind of conserving our earth. And it's asking for the diocese to assist congregations with the cost of greenhouse gas reductions. We have no idea what the budget is at this point, other than that some congregations that are considering it are realizing it's not an inexpensive proposal. The third one comes from St. Lawrence Brockville, is the resolution on tree planting, The simplest part of that resolution is that if a parish gets rid of a tree on its property, that they do the responsible thing and plant another or two trees. So that we don't end up with barren properties, or we cut down a bunch of trees never to replant them. So it's a, cut one down, plant one. And I know the bishop has been very much involved in some of those issues, particularly around Earth Day. And wonderful part of the Anglican reforestation problem. And then the fourth one, which is my individual guilt from this evening, is called Developing a Blue Community. And it wants to get rid of individual plastic bottles. So I will try to figure out how to do something creative with this, or at least put it in the road before it becomes part of the pavement. Yeah, I'm guilty, but this, the becoming a blue community is not specific to the Anglican community, but it asks us to increase our awareness around the wanton use of plastic bottles. So that comes out of a couple of parishioners, and I'm just trying to remember who the diocese was, and it originally with the UN and goes around. These are the four resolutions that are for us. Any questions? You will get all of the verbiage for the resolutions in your circular. Anything else? And then, well, the other one that Alex just mentioned, there will be a budget resolution. Good. Thank you.
Anything on? So the last couple of things on the agenda are, the first one is resources. Now, you've been given a lot of information this evening, and the majority of that information is on the website. You go onto the website and go to this icon, Synod 2023, and click in that, and Mark has everything that you need to know right under there. Everything is on the website. The circular, as Dave said, will go out to you, I think, around 10 days before Synod. And you'll have all of that information as well. But on the website, there's the process, there's the content, there's where to stay if you want to stay at Queen's. You can rent a room there that's really reasonable. You get a parking spot with it, so you don't have to worry about parking. You can park right there. There's the orientation video. Everything, as I say, is on there. There's also next Thursday, the 11th, there will be a question and answer online meeting, the same as we do with the outside. It'll be at 7 o'clock next Thursday evening, and Michael Reed and myself, and I believe Wendy will be there. So again, if you have any other concerns, any other questions, log in at that time and you can ask, and we can hopefully answer, any concerns that you have. We've really tried hard this synod to make sure that you are getting the information you need before you show up on that Friday evening. That you know what to expect on those 2 days. You know what's expected of you, and you know what to expect of us during that framework. So, as I said, we've worked hard, and you have a question?
I just have a question with regards to the closing Eucharist on Sunday morning. Is this the appropriate time to ask that?
I'm gonna get. So, anything else there? Is there any other questions on the agenda that we've had, the information we've given you tonight? Anything else you need to know? Anything online, Alex?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, then I'll move to the service on Sunday. Our third day of celebration will be on May 28th, 11 o'clock at the cathedral. We will be having our celebration Pentecost service. And we are asking parishes to please do an RSVP. Mark sent out an email last week There is a link in that email. If you could gather the names or at least a number of people that you think are coming from your church, and click into that, you can send that back. Mark will then be able to have the numbers, and we need to know really because we have to do printing, we need to do obviously the service and information, and for catering, because we will be having a lunch. We're still gonna go ahead and have a party. That's in 2 months or 2 years, we're gonna have a party. So none of that's being canceled. We're still gonna have a party on Sunday. So we kind of need to just have a rough idea of numbers. It's just gonna help our process a little better if we have that idea. So go ahead, ask your question now.
So when the conversation first started around that service on Pentecost Sunday, I believe it was the bishop's will that would be the only service in the diocese that day. That was what was communicated to us parish clergy. And I'm just wondering, now since that email came out last week, I guess, around numbers, I've been reluctant to do anything here because I didn't know if that was still the status quo, or if as a parish we were permitted to go ahead and have a parish worship. What the will of the bishop would be for that service?
My understanding is there was never anything said that any parish couldn't have their own service. My church is doing a service and has been from day one, and it will be done at 9.
No, that was communicated late last fall.
Was it?
Yeah,
Was it?
oh, stand up. Yeah, my original hope was that we could gather as a diocese for the celebration part. Pentecost, the coming together of the church, and all of us gathered from across the diocese, which we did when we went to RMC for the 140th. Not talking about something like we did for the 150th, was the K-Rock Center. We put 2,000 people, and that was a huge organizational piece. This was just an opportunity to say, let's come to our cathedral church, gather as a diocese, give thanks. We've been through so much with COVID and not being able to gather, come together and celebrate who we are as the church. That's why those 3 words have been driving forward our conversation around situation, the Friday, inspiration, and then celebration. Come together. I love a party. And especially on Pentecost. Given the reality that we're facing now, I would relax that. And that's why we'd like to have the RSVP. So back, I believe, if I remember rightly, when we did the 140, parishes could do an early service. And then those who wanted to come down to the big service were welcome to come. So they can either go to their own parish or come. I want to encourage the clergy to come as all possible, be present there. What's that, Bill?
I understand,
Yeah.
yes, the clergy are expected to be there.
Yeah, I'd love to have the clergy there. It's a powerful, visible symbol of who we are. But if you could do so, in some, if I'm going back in my memory now from the 140, you get either an honorary assistant to take the service, or a lay reader to do morning prayer, or something along those lines for those who wanted to stay at home, but encourage. And that's why we want to get those numbers so we know how many people to expect coming to the cathedral, and also for food and for the celebration. Yeah.
I'm just gonna make an announcement on Sunday, and I just wanted to make sure that I was announcing the right thing.
Yeah, I think that would be the way to go. That would make the most sense. And that, yeah, I can't think of anything more.
No, the only thing I'd add to that is, since we started this, and I mean, Michael Reed and I have been meeting for 5 years over 3 synods, but for this synod, we've been meeting for at least a year. I mean, this process started a year ago. And when we sort of made this framework of these 3 days, and we wanted to include the celebration on the Sunday, because we haven't celebrated our 160th because of COVID. we didn't know at that point that our bishop was going to resign. So our thought was, once that announcement was made and we added that farewell into the service, that maybe a lot more people may come on that Sunday to bid Bishop Holden farewell. And that was another part of why we sort of wanted numbers, because we figured there could be, you know, more people than we had maybe originally anticipated. Are there any other questions? Any concerns? Anybody's got anything online?
We'll stop reading by this weekend.
Yeah.
I don't know if any arts team will.
Yeah, no, nothing in there. Yes, from us. Okay, is there anything else? Anything else anyone wants to throw in the pot? Okay, then I would like to thank you all for coming and giving up your time, and being wonderfully dedicated lay delegates that have come to get as much information as you can about and clergy, yes. So I want to thank you. I want to thank our gracious hosts, St. Mark's, and they provided us with coffee and treats. And I just want to say that last night at our meeting, we sat at this table, and right behind me was the shelf with these trays of cookies on that drove me crazy for the whole meeting. I could smell. Luckily, they're over there tonight. They didn't drive me as nuts. So thank you all, and I will ask the bishop to close us with prayer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey, and also on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you and Canon Michael and the Synod planning team who have been working for a year. That team has grown. It's a large group. They're an animated group. When they meet at the Synod office, it's wonderful to watch the dynamism that is there. And then I threw the curveball of my resignation in the midst of that. I won't go into that whole story, but they have just accepted everything with grace as they continue to move forward. So thank you very much for that, to our hosts and to all of you for offering your names to stand, come to our Synod. It's deeply, deeply appreciated. So as we conclude tonight, let us all rise as we're able and say the grace together. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen. Good night, and good night to the folks on the conference bridge.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Thank you.